Hi there, it's Rachel with the Shades of Orange. Today I'm here to do my best of the year video talking about all of my favorite books that I read this year. I picked out 10, but I'm not going to rank them. Instead, I'm going to organize them by genre like I usually do in my videos. I will put timestamps down below, so if you don't care about a particular genre, you can skip over it. I am going to be talking about books that I read this year, not necessarily books that were published in 2018. However, looking at the list, I actually have quite a few new releases, so I'm really happy with how my reading turned out this year. All that being said, let's get into the books themselves. First, I want to talk science fiction, and I have to talk about Saga Volume 8 and 9. I particularly loved Volume 8. I won't talk any spoilers. This, of course, is a graphic novel series about a couple that come together. They are from opposite sides of warring planets. They get married, have a child, and the story follows them trying to keep their family together. It's epic, it's fun, it's inappropriate, it's very adult, which is a lot of things I love about it. I adore the artwork, and it's just something I've loved all these years. So it's definitely been featured on a lot of these previous best of the year videos, and I couldn't help but display it again. I really like some of the themes in these later volumes, particularly dealing with family and loss, and no spoilers here, but I'm very excited to get my hands on Volume 10, but I understand we're gonna have to wait quite a while. I have also one more graphic novel to talk about in science fiction, and that is Descender Volumes 5 and 6. I read both this year and absolutely loved them. This, if you don't know, is another space opera that in this case centers around a young AI boy who is a companion to a child. In this world, it's set in a future where we created artificial intelligence technology. However, these robots attacked from outer space. And after that event, AI robots were no longer in favor and were basically hunted down by humans. This story follows that aftermath when this young AI boy wakes up in this world to find that he is no longer a companion, but instead is being hunted down. I love this story. I think I love it more and more with the later volumes, and I particularly loved how the series ended. It's such a favorite. In fact, it might actually take Saga's place as my favorite graphic novel series of all time, which is saying a lot, but I adore stories involving AI, and this one is just wonderful. I love the watercolor artwork. It works so well for me, and I would love to get physical copies of it because it's just beautiful, and it's definitely one I plan to reread. Now to talk about actual science fiction novels, I have to mention Before Mars by Emma Newman. This is about a brilliant scientist and artist who gets the opportunity to go to Mars. However, this is complicated by the fact that she is actually a very new mother with a young child, and she makes the very controversial decision to go to Mars and leave her child at home with her husband. And given the length of her mission, she is going to be gone for years. And so a lot of this book deals with the fact that she made this choice and addresses choosing career over family or trying to have them both. And it also deals with issues of postpartum depression and not necessarily feeling attached to your child. I love this book for so many reasons, particularly these personal ones, because I think that Emma Newman was incredibly brave to write this story. I think a lot of authors, particularly female ones, are afraid to write these kind of unpopular narratives, but I think they are so important to exist, and I just adored this book for those reasons. Like with all Newman's books, there is also a mystery element to here, where when she gets to Mars, there is a note she finds in her own handwriting that says, "Do not trust anyone." So she also has to unravel this mystery, but if I'm honest, what really sold this book for me was those aspects of motherhood. So I highly recommend it to anyone who is interested in reading something that kind of goes against normal society values and really examines what it means to be a wife and a mother and to make those difficult choices and sometimes make the less popular, less acceptable choices. So absolutely recommend that one. And I also have to mention Foe by Iain Red. This is a book about a couple that live on an isolated farm when a stranger shows up and tells them that the husband has been selected for a mission and is going to be going into space. However, they have made arrangements so that his wife will not be alone, but instead will have companionship. And the story transpires from there. It's one you want to go into without knowing too much, which is usually the case with Iain Red's books. And I really adored this one. It is quiet and suspenseful. It's not very action-packed. It's definitely not a thriller. A lot of people put this under different genres like suspense or even horror. I think it better fits under science fiction because it does have that near future aspect to it. It's just very quiet science fiction. It's definitely not space opera or anything like that, but more of a speculative what if scenario following current technology into the near future. So I personally adore this one. If you're a fan of I'm Thinking of Ending Things, which you know is one of my favorite books from last year, this is a good one to pick up, although it's not the same, so go in with those expectations, but it was just unusual and puzzling and loved it so much, so it definitely had to make this list. Now switching over to fantasy, I have one book in this category and it's not very underhyped. In fact, it's quite the booktube favorite, but it made my list, so I gotta talk about it. And that is The Final Empire, which is the first book in the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. And I think most people know the general story of a group of people who are trying to overthrow an evil empire. And this book has an incredible magic system that is built all around ingesting metals. Everyone knows the general plot, so I'll leave it there. But what I loved about this book was the fact that it is a plot I really enjoy. It's about a bunch of underdogs and rebels fighting against the Empire. It actually gave me a lot of Star Wars vibes. And I just loved it so much. I became absorbed in the story. I have read the entire trilogy, but I'm only gonna put the first book on this list just because it's the only one I gave a full 5 stars to. I did enjoy the rest of the series, but this one particularly worked well for me. I liked the characters. I would say that the Lord, the Emperor, is one of the best villains I have ever read because he was so intriguing and I just want to know more about him, which is so much of what I loved in this book. So if you are one of the few people online who have not read this book, even if you're not a huge fantasy reader, I do recommend it. It's so easy to get into. The magic system is so easy to understand. And like everyone says, it's really cool. It's really interesting. And you know what? It lived up to all the hype. So this was one that definitely made my best of the year list. Now on to the last category, which of course is horror, and I have 5 books to talk about because I read a ton this year, mostly because of the Books in the Freezer podcast, but because I read so much, it means I found a lot of favorites and I want to share them with you. If you do listen to the podcast, some of these books might sound familiar, but I did still want to include them in the video version of my best of the year video, so bear that in mind because not everyone who watches my videos necessarily listens to the podcast, so I did want to be inclusive here and give these books another round of shout outs. First, I want to talk about Uzamaki by Junji Ito, and this is actually a manga, but it's a horror manga, so that's why I'm including it here. And this is about a town that becomes obsessed with the shape of spirals. And that sounds like the most ridiculous synopsis you have ever heard. It does not sound creepy at all, but trust me, the way that this book is written with the illustrations is so bizarre and is just so creepy. The author just got in my head, and this is one of the most psychologically manipulative books that I have read. It's one of the scariest horror I've read this year, and it really played with my mind. After reading it, I started seeing spirals everywhere and just noticing the shape, and I can't believe how scary I found this book. So I just have to include it in this video because a book that can take a synopsis, a premise like that, and make it so bizarrely creepy and so personal, just definitely has to earn a place among my favorites. It was so brilliant, so out there, and so unexpected because I went to this book very skeptical, but I highly recommend it. It's one that is definitely worth checking out, especially if you like any kind of Japanese inspired horror, which there is a lot of out there, and this is one of the best. Now I want to talk about a book called The Nightmare Room by Chris Sorensen, and this is about a couple that move into a house after their young son has died. This house is potentially haunted, as you would expect from a horror book, and I really like the fact that this book also has an audio aspect to it because the husband in this book is an audiobook narrator and sets up a studio in the basement, and with that he starts to hear strange noises in his recordings. It's very cool and is made even more interesting by the fact that the author himself is a very well-known established audiobook narrator himself, so he got to bring a lot of his own work into his story. I have gone on record of saying that I do not like haunted house stories. I have turned down many a review copy because I found out it was a haunted house story and did not think that I would favorably review it. And this book changed my mind. This book made me think that maybe I can love haunted house stories because I love this book. So that is one of the largest reasons I think it has to be among my favorites, is the fact that it's a book that really changed my mind on one of the biggest subgenres of horror, which is really big, the fact that I do not like one of the most popular kinds of horror stories. But this one worked for me. I think what I like so much is that while it does have that creepy house aspect to it, there's also a lot of other layers going on. I don't want to spoil anything, but because of the emotional loss that the couple is going through with the death of their son, this book deals with a lot of deep family issues and emotions and just goes to some really dark places that I was not expecting and definitely loved. So if you're looking for a complex haunted house story, even if you're someone who doesn't necessarily normally pick them up, I definitely recommend this one. Now I want to talk about a horror novella, and that of course is going to be Sour Candy by Kealan Burke, which I have gushed about on a couple videos on this channel. But this is about a man who goes to the grocery store and watches the spoiled child have a meltdown in the candy aisle. However, through circumstances, this child ends up following him home and somehow takes on the role of being his son. It has a bizarre setup, but the payoff is absolutely worth it. I describe this as the best creepy child story that I've ever read because this little boy is so bizarre, so creepy, and he is just everything I love about creepy kids. So don't want to give away too much given the length of this, but I've always said since reading it that I can no longer look at Sour Candy the same way, and I love the fact that there is a bit of a psychological aspect to this book because of the fact that everyone is convinced that this boy is of course the man's son, except the man doesn't think so, and things really start to get twisted as things go along and the boy just manipulates the situation, and it's just this terrible downward spiral, which you know I love in horror. So I definitely recommend that one. It is available usually on Kindle Unlimited, so if you have a subscription, that's a really easy way to pick it up, but I think it's great and it's a good punchy short read. And now to talk about a bit of an older horror book, I also read I Am Legend by Richard Matheson, which really surprised me because I don't normally love a lot of post-apocalyptic horror, but this one worked so well for me. And this is about a man who believes he is the last person alive on Earth. There was some kind of plague that turned everyone else into these vampiric zombies, and now he is trying to survive in his house while these creatures are clawing at his door. I loved it for a few reasons, one being the fact I did listen to it on audio and the narrator was incredible. He just really gave me the sense of isolation and despair, and he did make the book feel very psychologically haunting and much scarier than I expected it to be. But the other thing I love so much and I don't feel like enough people talk about it, is the fact that this book is about a man who is very scientifically minded and very skeptical. So despite seeing these creatures that appear to be vampires in most senses of the word, they have this aversion to garlic and all these other signs, but he is so skeptical that he doesn't quite believe that to be true and ends up doing all these scientific experiments trying to figure out what is actually going on. And I love that because I feel like that would be me. I am such a skeptic that even though I have seen things in my life that I cannot explain, I do not believe in the paranormal. Just personally, that's my own personal bias. So I feel like I would have been reacting the same way he did, because he really tries to find the truth and the science behind these crazy creatures and the situation, which certainly does seem to have a supernatural aspect to it, but he still tries to ground it in reality, which I absolutely loved, and it's definitely one of the biggest reasons that this became a new favorite of mine. And the last one on this list is possibly my favorite, but it's so hard to choose. It's definitely up there. It is a 5-star read, and that is The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. And this is about a married gay couple that go on vacation with their young adopted daughter when strangers show up at their door and ask them to make a terrible choice. This is another one that is best going in without knowing too much, but trust me, it is suspenseful and exciting, and it definitely will appeal to fans of thrillers because it is so action-packed and tense, and I just wanted to know what was going to happen. I found out this year that I love home invasion stories, and this one has that aspect to it. It's so well written, it's so well done. I became attached to all the characters and I just adored it. So probably one of my all-time favorite horror reads, possibly my favorite of the year, and definitely recommend it to any horror fans that are even considering picking it up. It's great, just do it. Well, it's hard to believe, but that's it for my best of the year video. Hopefully you found some great recommendations. If you follow my channel very closely, some of these probably weren't a surprise, but I gotta talk about my favorites. It's so fun to get one last chance to gush about them this year. If you are a booktuber, please feel free to link your own best of the year video down below. It's a great way for me to find out about new channels that I may not have even known existed. And if you're just a reader, feel free to just list some of your favorites down below and let me know of the books I mentioned, which ones you've read, which ones you've enjoyed, all that good stuff. Otherwise, I will talk to you again soon in another video. Thanks for watching. Okay, bye.